Hello, hello, and welcome. Before we begin, let's acknowledge something honestly. The world feels unstable right now. Leadership is fractured. Trust feels thin. Institutions feel questionable. And truth feels blurred. And when trust collapses externally, the nervous system searches for something to anchor to. If you felt unsettled, disillusioned, or quietly shaken by what you're witnessing in the world, you are not alone. But today, we're not going to spiral. We're going to anchor. Because when external trust collapses, internal sovereignty must rise. So let's take a breath together and begin. Let's slow this down. When trust collapses externally, something very specifically is happening internally. The nervous system begins scanning for safety. And if it doesn't find stability out there, it looks for it somewhere else. Human nervous systems are built on trust, safety, and security. And we regulate through predictability. We relax through stability. And we soften when structure feels solid. When leadership fractures, when corruption surfaces, when narratives shift, the body interprets it as instability. And instability activates survival. That survival can look like anger, fear, cynicism, hyper research, withdrawal, hopelessness. But here's what's important. When trust collapses externally, we have two options. We can collapse with it, or we can anchor somewhere deeper. Now, here's the part that matters. We can't control global instability, but we can decide what anchors us when it appears. And this is where faith comes in. Not blind faith, not denial, and not bypassing. Something much steadier than that. Faith is coherence. It's an inner alignment. Faith as trust in deeper order, even when surface structure crumbles. History shows us something powerful. Empires fall, leaders fail, and systems corrupt. And yet humanity continues. Why? Because coherence is stronger than chaos. Order eventually reorganizes, but it reorganizes through individuals who refuse to become internally chaotic. Faith is not pretending things are fine. Faith is choosing who you will be in unstable times. But faith without embodiment becomes a philosophy. And philosophies won't steady your nervous system. So let's bring this into sovereignty. Because sovereignty is what faith looks like in the body. First, let's talk about that word sovereignty. What does it mean? The word sovereignty actually means to be self-governing. To be self-governing, not governed by our fears, our worries, our doubts, not governed by our dramas, our traumas, and external environment. Self-governing, to be governed by our soul, by our higher self. And our higher self has certain characteristics. They call them the 8 C's of the self. And the 8 C's are curiosity, compassion, courage, confidence, clarity, calm, connectedness, and creativity. So those are the 8 C's. Make sure that I write them in the show notes for you so that you can check those out afterwards. I keep them put on a piece of paper, she say the characteristics of self, and I literally have them by my desk, both here and at home. I keep them out for clients. And the reason is it reminds us what we can come back to when the world or when life looks like chaos. Then we can come back to our natural characteristics, which is what these are, and then we can find the stability within ourselves. So that's what sovereignty is, and what faith looks like in our body is sovereignty. So when trust in leaders collapses, the nervous system wants to control. It wants control over information, control over outcomes, control over narratives. But control is not sovereignty. Sovereignty is internal regulation. Sovereignty is saying, I cannot control global events, but I can regulate my field before form. And if your field collapses into fear, your form will follow. If your field stabilizes into clarity, your form will reorganize from wisdom. It's not passive. This is true power. Now, I don't want this to sound abstract. This isn't spiritual language floating in the air. There is solid biology underneath everything that we are talking about. So let's go ahead and ground this. Neuroscience tells us chronic exposure to instability increases our cortisol levels. It increases amygdala reactivity, and it decreases executive function. So the translation for this is the more you marinate in the chaos, the less clearly you will think. But heart-brain coherence research shows something else. When breathing slows, when attention returns to the present sensation, when gratitude or compassion is activated, the nervous system stabilizes. Cognitive clarity returns and decision-making improves. You are not helpless in chaos. You are influenceable. You are influential. Mirror neurons, emotional contagion, entrainment. Your regulation contributes to the field. You are not a spectator. You are a participant. So if that's true, if our internal state shapes perception and decision-making, then this becomes bigger than personal peace. This becomes about creation, because the world we desire isn't built from dysregulation. And we do not create the future through outrage alone. We create it through clarity, discernment, boundaries, aligned action. Faith without action is fantasy. Action without coherence is chaos. But intention plus emotional coherence plus the next visible action, that is manifestation grounded in biology and spirit. So if you want a different world, start with your nervous system. Start with your speech. Start with your household. Start with your integrity. Large systems collapse, but coherent individuals rebuild them. And I know this can still feel big. So let's make it simple. What does this actually look like on a Tuesday afternoon when the news is loud and your body tightens? So here are some practical tools, not theory. First, we want to limit chaos exposure windows. So what do I mean by that? It means when we are watching the news or we're scrolling, what I would refer to now as doom scrolling, we can set timers. This can also include how much time we spend with people that are deeply, deeply within the spiral themselves. How many and for how long is healthy for you? So how many times in a day and for how long can you handle exposure to these things before you become dysregulated? What is your capacity? Now, this doesn't mean that we're weak if we can't handle this all the time by any means. There's a reason that soldiers end up with PTSD or complex PTSD, which means long-term stress repeated over and over and over again, as opposed to a single event. We see this in people who grow up in trauma or chaotic homes. Doesn't mean we're weak. It just means that our nervous system jumps on because the subconscious mind says, this looks like something we've experienced before and we are now in danger. So how much can you handle and stay grounded and regulated? And it might be that you can, be in these conversations. Maybe it's part of your work, but then you make a point of taking a walk outside, doing some breath work. We'll get into some of that. But how many and for how long? And we need to check that. Can you track your cycle of staying calm in your nervous system? Even for those of us that are, say, coaching or counseling or working with people, we have a number. How many clients can we handle in a day without becoming dysregulated? It's a big deal to hold space for somebody and stay completely present. For myself, I know that 5 is a sweet spot for me. If I have 5 clients in a day, then, and I do other work in between, I will be able to reset myself, not a problem. I can do up to 7. 7 every day would wipe me out. So I know what my max is 7, and I know my sweet spot is 5. And so for the most part, that's where I try to hold it to most days. And any great counselor, therapist, coach is going to have a number that is like, this is what I can do, still remain visionary, contemplative, do my own work on myself without crashing and burning. So, what is your personal capacity? And then another thing we want to do is we want to regulate before responding to the news. So that might be that we see something, and before we repeat it, before we react, can we take 3 to 5 deep breaths? So, whatever works for you to regulate yourself before you respond to what you're seeing. So, as I said, that can look like breath work. So, inhaling for 4, exhaling for 8. That's an automatic slow and this begins the parasympathetic nervous system. It could be inhaling for 4 through the nose with a pause at the top and sighing the breath out for 8. So, that might look like, and 3 rounds of those breaths will calm the nervous system and actually starts to decrease cortisol levels within the body. Biology. It could look like doing yoga. It could look like nature walks. It could look like brain dumping those worries and fears out before you perpetuate them out. Whatever helps you find your center again. Another, breathe through the body before forming an opinion. It is really easy for us to get pulled into the noise that is being shouted at us. Remember, the question that you can always ask is, what do they gain? What does the person gain by me listening to them? It's an important question. Because once we ask that question, then it already helps us start to not dissociate, but we start to create some detachment from what is happening. We can take a breath and then we can ask, does that feel truthful? Does it feel like the whole truth? Am I only getting half a story? What's going on out there? There's a lot of noise. Breathe before you form your opinion. And be aware of positioning. Anything that's encouraging us to be us versus them, that is not healthy. We live in a world of paradox. What I mean by that is that opposites are not in conflict. And we want to look for the and. So I agree with this, and I'm open to understanding the other side of things. There is a place in between where we can find an us versus the war that creates competition and chaos. Another, take time to connect with at least 1 or 2 of your soul characteristics. So remember, those are curiosity, courage. That can be like asking questions to understand. Compassion. Can we find some common ground? They're just like us. They too get angry. They too are scared. Confidence, clarity, calm, connectedness, and not the false connection of finding people that agree with us. I mean, deep connection based on vulnerability and respect. And then creativity. And then the other thing we can do is ask, is this mine to carry? We can't do anything per se about the evil in this world, aside from acknowledging it and choosing not to be it. If those we trust and believe in have shown their true colors, then it is simply an opportunity to remember that no one should be on a pedestal. And then finally, take one aligned action locally. This can be pulling your support from companies and products that don't align with your value without anger. Just a simple no. I'm not going to put my money there. And on the other side of that is it can be supporting organizations that do align with your values. Just imagine yourself 5 years from now, aligned, confident, calm. What would she or he do? Chaos is loud. Creation is quiet. But quiet creation outlasts the noise. At the end of the day, this comes back to something ancient. Not trust in systems, not trust in leaders. Trust in something deeper. Trust in coherence itself. Faith is not trust in people. Faith is trust in deeper order. Faith is trust that truth eventually surfaces. Faith is trust that corruption exposes itself. Faith is trust that consciousness evolves. And most importantly, faith is trust in your capacity to remain coherent when the world is not. When external trust collapses, internal faith becomes leadership. You are not powerless. You are influential. The field reorganizes around coherence. So be coherence. And if you feel how important this capacity is, this ability to stay coherent in chaotic times, this is exactly what we build together inside Align Your Life and the Aligned Human Project. Learning to regulate, learning to act from sovereignty, from alignment, learning to build without collapsing. I'm doing a free alignment masterclass, and we have a free community on Facebook called the Aligned Human Circle as well. All the links are below. But today, begin here. Stabilize your field. Alignment isn't something you achieve. It's something you return to. Remember, you are the field. You shape the form.